A judge just forced the state of Florida to rewrite the property tax amendment that you're going to be voting on in November. Not tweak it, but actually rewrite it. So the title's gone, several of the promises in it got thrown out, and one specific phrase that I've told you about in my previous videos, the one about full elimination, has been deleted entirely. So the new official language came out on August 14th, and voting ballots start printing here in days. So let me walk you through exactly what changed, because this matters now for how you vote in November. Now, if you've been following along, you know I've done several videos on this amendment. And in the last one, I told you there were 3 lawsuits headed to a hearing over whether the ballot wording was fair. And that hearing has actually happened, and the plaintiffs won. And now we have brand new official ballot language. So this is the update, what the judge said, what changed, and what it actually means for you. Hi, I'm Jamie Kolev with the Kolev Group here in Cape Coral, Florida, and I've read the enroll bill. I've tracked every step of this, and I'm going to give you exactly what has changed in plain English, no spin from both sides. So real quick, let's back up one step. In Florida, the words you read on the ballot, the title, and the short summary are legally required to be fair, clear, and neutral. They can't read like an ad for the amendment. So 3 lawsuits argued that Amendment 3's language broke that rule. On August 4th, Leon County Circuit Judge David Frank agreed completely. He called the language clearly and conclusively defective and ordered that the state rewrite it. So here's specifically what he threw out. First of all, the title, Save Our Homes from Excessive Property Taxes, he called akin to a political slogan. He said the word save was designed to provoke an emotional response, and that the title was actually advocating for a position instead of neutrally describing the amendment. He also said Save Our Homes could confuse voters because that's already the name of an existing totally separate Florida tax protection. That's the 3% assessment cap that we've talked about in previous videos. Using that phrase for a brand new amendment kind of muddies that water. Now, the judge didn't just say fix it and walk away. His ruling actually spelled out what the replacement needed to include: the 2-step phase-in, the cap change, the residency rule, and the full list of what local governments can spend the money on. He didn't require the state to use his exact words, but he required them to correct every single problem that he identified in the bill. That's a judge that's being very hands-on. And he was explicit about one thing. This ruling is not whether the tax cut is a good policy. His words were essentially, that's not the court's job. The court's only job is to make sure you get a fair, accurate explanation before you decide. He ruled that voters weren't getting that with the current state of the bill. So if the old language is gone, what does the new language actually say? And this is where it kind of gets interesting. Last week, on August 14th, the Attorney General released the court-ordered rewrite. Same policy, but completely different wording. And honestly, it's a lot more honest about what the amendment actually does. So let's start with the new title. It's no longer a slogan. It now reads, Increased Homestead Exemption, Lower Cap on Increases in Non-Homestead Property Assessments. It's kind of clunky and it's kind of boring, and that's the point. It just describes what the amendment does. The rewrite also drops the promotional promises the judge flagged. So gone are the claims that it benefits taxpayers, protects small businesses, ensures core services, and guarantees fairness. Instead of selling you on those outcomes, it now just spells out the mechanics. And the new language finally states both steps clearly. The homestead exemption for non-school taxes rises to $150,000 in 2027 and $250,000 in 2028, with inflation adjustments after that. The old version actually only mentioned the $250,000 number and skipped right over the fact that 2027 is a smaller amount. So I just want to clarify for you, though, the amendment itself did not change. Not one word of the actual policy. What changed is that the sales pitch got stripped off the ballot, and now what you're left with is a plain description of the mechanics. So same car, they just took away the shiny wrapper. But there's one change in here that I specifically owe you an update on. And that's because it's something that I've talked about in previous videos. So in my last video, I pointed out a specific phrase in the official ballot summary. It said the amendment requires, through general law, a schedule for full elimination. meaning the ballot text itself framed this $250,000 exemption as just the first step toward wiping out non-school property taxes entirely. That was accurate. That's what the ballot said at the time. But the judge took issue with that too, and the rewrite is going to change that. The new language makes clear that there is no required schedule to eliminate non-school property taxes. Instead, it says lawmakers would create a process that allows local governments to raise the exemption further on their own, potentially all the way up to the home's full assessed value. But there's no automatic mandated march to zero. So if you watched my last video and walked away thinking full elimination was like locked in as the plan, please update that in your head. It's now framed as something local governments could choose to do over time, not something the amendment actually schedules. And that's a meaningful distinction. The new wording is much more accurate on that. And I'm definitely calling that out directly because I'd rather keep you current than let an old detail stand. The ballot said one thing in July, it says something different and frankly clearer today. And that's the whole reason I keep making these update videos. But of everything the judge flagged, there's one change most people completely missed, and it has nothing to do with your tax bill. It's about who controls the city's money. And this is the one almost nobody's really talking about, and it might be the most important thing the judge flagged. He ruled the old summary left out a material fact, something voters genuinely needed to know and weren't being told. And here it is. Buried in this amendment is a change to what's called the home rule, the principle that your city and your county governments control their own budgets. For the first time, this amendment would write into Florida's constitution the state's legislature's right to control how cities and counties spend their property tax revenue. So think about what that means locally. Right now, Cape Coral City Council and Lee County Commission decide how to spend the property taxes they've collected. This amendment would put language in the Constitution giving Tallahassee basically a say in that. The judge said that's a significant shift in power and that hiding it from the ballot summary was one of the reasons the old language was defective. So this was never only about a homestead exemption. Tucked inside, it is a shift of budget authority from local officials, the ones you can call, the ones who show up at your HOA meeting, toward the state. Now, whether you think that's a good or bad thing, you deserve to know that it's in there because the old ballot didn't tell you and the new one has to. Now, there are two more corrections the judge forced, and both of them affect who this amendment actually helps. The judge flagged two more claims as misleading, and the rewrite fixes both of these. These matter because they change who you think is benefiting from this. So first, the old summary said the amendment protects small businesses, and the judge rejected that, and here's why. The amendment lowers the annual assessed increase cap on non-homestead properties from 10% down to 5%. But that cap applies to all non-homesteaded property, big commercial buildings, rental properties, vacation homes, not just small businesses. So the new language drops the small business framing and just says what it is. A lower cap on all non-homesteaded properties. That's actually relevant here in Cape Coral, where we have a lot of rental and vacation property. So if you own a non-homestead property, that 10 to 5% cap change applies to you, whether you're a small business or not. Second, the new resident rule. The corrected version is clear. If you were not a Florida resident as of December 31st, 2026, you'd get the existing exemption when you qualify for homestead. But you would not get the larger exemption until your 5th year of claiming it. It's tied to residency as of the date and when you start claiming, not simply when you show up. Put those together and the theme is the same across every fix. The old ballot oversold who gets protected and undersold the fine print. The new one is drier, but it is straight. So where does all of this leave the amendment itself? Because here's the thing a lot of people are getting wrong about this ruling. The single most important thing to understand is the amendment is still on the ballot. The policy did not change at all, not the exemption amounts, not the phase-in period, nothing really. This ruling was only ever about the words that described it, not the actual substance of the amendment. So you'll still vote on Amendment 3 in November, and it still needs 60% to pass. If it passes, it still takes effect January 1st, 2027. The only difference is that the description that you read in the voting booth will now be the plain language version instead of the marketing version. And the timing is tight. The challengers have until around August 24th to object to the new wording, and ballots start printing August 27th. So this could still see one more twist, but the clock is nearly out. So let's talk about both sides fairly. The plaintiffs, which included a former Republican state senator and a former Democratic legislature, so this was bipartisan, are calling it a win for voters. One of them said the ballot box isn't a place for political advertising, and that the case was never about whether property taxes should be lower, only about honest wording. Now let's go to the other side. Governor DeSantis, who pushed this, still argues homeowners need relief from rising property tax bills and that local governments can tighten their own spending. And opponents point out that clearer wording doesn't change their core objective. State analysts estimate the measure cuts local revenue by roughly $4.9 billion in its first year, growing to nearly $12 billion a year once it's fully phased in, which they argue means service cuts or higher fees elsewhere. So the wording fight is settled, but the policy fight is not. So if you take one thing from this video, don't confuse a language rewrite with a policy change. The court cleaned up how the amendment is described. What it does is exactly the same, which means your job as a voter is exactly the same. Understand the real mechanics and decide for yourself. So let's do a real quick recap. A judge ruled Amendment 3's ballot language was misleading and ordered a rewrite. The state released that rewrite on August 14th. The slogan title is gone, replaced with a plain description, and the promotional promises got stripped. The full elimination language is gone, and the summary now has to disclose that the amendment shifts some local budget control to the state. And the small businesses and new resident wording got corrected. The policy itself did not change one bit, and it is still on your November ballot, still needs 60%, and still takes effect in 2027 if it passes. So you came in for a quick update, and you're leaving knowing exactly what's changed, why a judge forced it, and what's still the same, which is probably more than most people who are voting on this in November will ever know. But regardless, whatever the ballot says, the math is the math, so you can see what Amendment 3 would actually do for your specific bill today, 2027, and 2028 with our free simulator at thekolevgroup.com/tax. It only takes about 60 seconds to see your numbers. And remember, the plaintiffs still have a window to challenge this new language, so there could be one more twist before the ballots print. And I'll cover it the moment it happens, so don't forget to subscribe so you can catch it. This has been one of the fastest moving ballot fights in the state, and we're not even done yet, so I'll keep you current all the way up to November 3rd. We'll see you in the next one.